Well, here we are again. Welcome everyone. Just getting started this morning, like feeling like I got to get into the sort of the rhythm today. Uh, Yet another, what would you call it? Like a challenging morning to get up and figure out, all right, how are we going to make our way through uh, this one? So I'm going to let you get started kind of onboarding to this morning's Facebook Live, of course. Part of the community experience that we have on a Sunday morning is this kind of digital connecting place that we can land for 30 or 40 minutes and chill out and pay attention to each other. So make sure you shout out to each other and say good morning. Let people know that you're okay, or maybe you can even tap into some of the feelings you've been experiencing this week as we get another layer of challenge that's come our way, and find a word or two to just capture that. Even if you're showing up to this after it's done, it wouldn't be bad to just give expression to a couple of indicators as to how you're kind of managing all that we're going through at the moment. So, welcome. Glad you're here. I wanted to start with sort of a personal reflection. I was thinking as I was kind of setting up this morning, when I was growing up, I've always had this low grade claustrophobia that I've had to deal with for most of my life. And usually it's very manageable, but sometimes it gets to be anxiety producing for me. And one of the moments when that can happen for me is when I get in an elevator, believe it or not. So I get in an elevator and I'm fine, but if it starts getting too crowded in that elevator, if things start closing in on me in an elevator in a confined space, I can feel my anxiety starting to go up. Right? And I have to do everything that I can to convince myself just not to panic, not to let anxiety kind of get the best of me in a moment like that. It's not super bad. So if you get stuck in an elevator with me, I'm not going to pop, but it definitely is an issue. And I will say, and I'm curious what you're experiencing, this last week of having to literally shut the windows and close the doors and breathe air that's moving through our air purifier and trying to create atmosphere by turning on fans, it's starting to wear on me. And I'm getting that same kind of feeling like, why am I having to live in this tiny little box? And that feeling of claustrophobia is definitely an anxiety that I'm, managing. And I know for so many of us, there's just so many layers of challenges that we're managing. Last week, someone had to leave our time together because they lost someone that they deeply cared for. So we're experiencing work stress and health issues, and kids getting back into school and how to navigate that. There's just a lot of stress on top of everything that's going on in the world. And then, of course, I remember, maybe you remember too, waking up that day when we realized that, hey, we're in the midst of a global pandemic. Remember back then? And that pandemic is affecting our species and settling into the lungs of our species. So we're feeling like, hey, some of us can't breathe. And some of us are driven to this point, especially in America and around the world, that we're forced to take our last breath under the weight of that pandemic. That alone was an ongoing tragedy that we have to bear, that weighs on all of us. And then if that wasn't enough, we hear a black man, George Floyd, who cries out, "I can't breathe either." Right? Remember those days when we woke up to that experience? And George Floyd, who screams, "I can't breathe," under the weight of really what is ages and ages of historic racism that accumulates in a civic servant with his leg on George's neck. and George says, "I can't breathe," and this sort of explosion of waking up to um, all of the ways our society and our individuals and our systems are complicit with an ongoing system uh, that fosters inequity. We're all kind of struggling. Remember when we woke up to that day and how painful that was, and continues to be, and that we're navigating that. And then of course, uh, the heat waves that we hit, crazy, and then fire season, and all of us again struggling to find a way to breathe. It's almost it's very disconcerting, right? My sense is that for many of us, we're starting to wonder. We wake up in the morning, we look out at a blood red sky, and we think, have we wandered too far east of Eden? Using the old biblical metaphor or John Steinbeck's work. Have we really wandered, just too far east? And we got to pause out here and say, are we heading in the right direction? Or what can we do that might begin to kind of uh, turn this around, since we have such a role to play in environmental degradation and the way we manage our forests and the way we manage our social fabric, the way we manage our economic systems and our healthcare systems and our education systems. We know we got a full plate on top of just navigating everyday life. So that's what I want to pay a little attention to today. Is maybe we have wandered too far east of Eden, and kind of linking us back to that origin story today to say, are there some bits of wisdom in that old origin story that might help us navigate the waves of tragedy that we're having to cope with as spiritual people, as human beings, and to see if there's some resources there for us today. Before we get started, however, in that theme, and I'm like you, kind of wrestling with it. I don't have all the answers clearly, but I also, spend time like you do, kind of wondering about this stuff, tethered to my spiritual tradition. So I just want to spend some time with that today. But before we get going, I posted up a picture of a possible kind of altar that you can create at home that was triggered by a poem that was floating around Facebook that I want to share today as a way to kind of honor the loss, particularly in light of 9/11 and in light of the just absolute loss of life that we're experiencing in the West through all of the fires. And if you got that together, that's great. I have a little bowl here as well. What I invited you to do was maybe gather up a few leaves or something that sort of reminds us of the gift of life, and then to accumulate some of the ashes that are falling around your property or all over your car, or on the windowsills, and to place or brush some of those ashes into that bowl. And then today, as an orienting piece, just to simply to honor and to tend to, for a moment, the just incredible loss of life that we're experiencing in the midst of the early stages of fire season. Okay? So I'm going to have you do that. I have my bowl of ashes here. You can use that, or you can look back at the picture that I posted on Facebook. Let's just pause for a moment, and then I'm going to use that poem today that has been floating around, that was written by Sadie Whipp, that reminds us of what is in these ashes that we want to honor today. Okay? So just take a couple of deep breaths and kind of pay attention to your bowl of ash, or maybe use your mind's eye just to gaze over the ashes that have accumulated in our atmosphere, that linger in the air, that you confront each and every moment. And let us be present for those ashes today. So let these words guide you. Do not forget that the ashes falling from the sky are all that remains of the great pine, the waving grasses, the thistle, the bear and the coyote, the deer, and even the mouse that could not escape. Do not forget that the ashes falling from the sky are all that remains of home, of garden, someone's favorite chair, grapevines, memories, and even those of our kind who have succumbed to the flame. Those are the ashes that linger in the sky. And so gather some of those sacred ashes in a sacred and holy manner and bring them to your altar. Today we offer prayers for those beings, all that has been lost to the fire, to honor their death, to honor their passing. And in this moment, we pray for life. In this moment, we call in the rain. In this moment, we remind fire that it is full. It has gobbled enough. It can rest. So may all beings be safe, so that all beings might be loved and all beings be remembered this day. Today we mourn. Today we hold them all as they linger in the ashes that fall from the sky. Amen. Well, hopefully today, even spending a moment honoring all that's going on east of Eden just gives you a way to connect your heart and soul to the experience we're having collectively as a planet, as a biosphere, in this, our little speck inside this huge cosmos. What's happening here? It's important to allow that capacity not to simply be happening out there, but the whole goal of the religious or spiritual life, and this is what we do together on a Sunday morning, is to let that move in here, right? Hold it in the essence of how you understand soul or spiritual landscape or your heart, and know that those things are tethered together. Those things are tethered together in a way that matters. And my kind of proposal for today is that our way forward is not just solving all of the symptomatic problems that arise because of all the dis-ease that we have partly created ourselves, but partly absorbed as a people. But so just problem solving isn't the way through this. Reestablishing the tether, the bond, the connection, the sacred fabric that sustains and holds all of us is really the work that we need to do alongside of the solution work, right? That's why spending some time together on a Sunday morning matters. So let me just spend a moment and kind of say what can sometimes get in the way of that is our own religious traditions. Because in almost every religious tradition, there is some kind of sense of how to detach oneself from the world. right? You can read it in the Gospels. You can hear it in language like, those who want to follow me have to learn how to deny themselves, to kind of disconnect from their lives. You can even feel it in the ritual of baptism, where we, in a sense, die to the physical self and connect ourselves to the life of the sacred. There's this sense of letting go, of release, of disconnection that has some spiritual value to it that we honor. You think about stories in the biblical narrative of wealthy people who are told, if you want to enter the kingdom of heaven, you have to get rid of everything, like purge, hold it at arm's length at least, whether it be wealth or possessions. And yet, here we are, seeing people lose everything, and I don't want to be caught up into the the sort of a trap that, maybe that's sometimes losing everything means you get to start again, or you get to have some sort of spiritual moment of reflection. And I'm not sure that's the case here. I notice it too in even Eastern religions, right? There's this sense in Eastern religions about, in Buddhism in particular, about kind of having this capacity as a spiritual person to kind of invite yourself to loosen or disconnect from the world, right? To detach from the world. Even once I was in a Native American sweat lodge, and there was this sense of kind of using water to kind of cleanse yourself, just to get rid of everything. And then that is the sacred act, is this idea of non-attachment, right, to all of this stuff. And yet, I don't know about you, but my sense is that as we've watched so much be destroyed, we realize deeply that it's not non-attachment that we need to foster, but a sacred attachment, to world and to tree and to bird and to the stuff that I need to accumulate to survive. It's not just thinking about a spiritual detachment so that I kind of float in this ethereal spiritual zone, and that as the world is crumbling around me, I'm able to kind of step back and, sit in my lotus position and kind of be separated from it all. But rather, it is this invitation to think about how do I deeply connect to all that is going on in life in a meaningful way, right? So it's more about leaning into the relationship, not stepping back from the relationship. And I think many of us, we're a bit exhausted, so we're prone to think, well, I'm stuck in my house, I'm sort of isolated, so I'm going to use this time to kind of hold all this at arm's length. So like me in the elevator, our anxiety level is not sparked. And what I'm telling you is that I also think there's a tradition that we need to honor that says there is ways to enter into an intimacy of relationship with everything out there that provides some way forward. So why do I say that? Let me give you a little bit of grounding for that. And this is taking us back to our origin stories. If you go back to the book of Genesis, one of the earliest stories in the Hebrew tradition, there is this amazing scene that I remember the first time I was studying that book in seminary, I think it was, and I read this particular story, like a light bulb or a trigger went off for me that hadn't gone off before. And it's when Cain slays his brother Abel. And you remember in this story of Cain slaying Abel, that Cain I think he's asked a question in that story. God shows up and he says, hey Cain, where's your brother? That's a great question, right? Where is your brother? And Cain asks that counter question that we've come to know so well. Well, what? Am I my brother's keeper? And of course, we all know the answer to that question, but it gets at the heart of um, this sort of tendency to disconnect from the world, right? What do you mean? Why am I my brother's keeper? And the answer is absolutely you are. But Cain had slain Abel, and in the slaying of Abel, as Abel's blood is shed, the text tells you that the earth opens its mouth and swallows the very blood of Abel. That the earth itself feels the drain of life out from Abel in the act of this violence, and it's out from um, the blood that seeps into the land. That is where the cry goes up to God to say, hey, something's gone totally wrong here. And that imagery of that the violence that happens amongst human beings seeps into the fabric of earth is, and especially in the origin stories that, we begin in this garden space and now earth is absorbing violence and it's crying out to God to say, something's broken. And then Cain, of course, is cast to struggle and to strain in the relationship to the earth. It's just a huge metaphor that I think for us right now in our circumstances is a reminder that humanity and earth are bound together in relationship that matters so deeply and is so intimate that the key is not to step back from the suffering of earth, but rather to re-embrace the intimacy of our connection to the earth, right? Our connection to planet, to soil, to air, to water, to biodiversity, to species diversity. We, just like the Black Lives Matter calls us to bring to the center of our kind of white privilege the life experience of Black lives, it's the same pattern as we reimagine our relationship to planet, that it has to be gathered up and it has to arrive at table for a conversation that we are able to re-acknowledge ourselves as co-equals, cohabitators of the same space. And I think that's, if there's any kind of trend line that spirituality needs to meander into or down, to me, that feels like the new trend line. Let me give you another story. So that one takes us back to Eden itself. So from east of Eden, we go back to Eden to gather up some potential wisdom for how we can re-find ourselves in right relationship to the essence of what life is all about. Another story emerged out of the Mark class. Let me share this one briefly, which is another great one. In the Markan study, we find the followers of Jesus, and I made a link to this in a previous thing about the 12, but now the followers of Jesus are asked to cross the water and enter into shoreline that is foreign to them. And as they're on the waters, they're straining at the oars because the waves are fighting them back. And there's this sense of a metaphor of we're just having a hard time, moving into the spaces that are calling us to live more humanely, more connected to each other, more spiritually grounded, beyond the confines of our religious construct or our clan or family or identity politics, right? We having to move into new territory, and the poor disciples are straining at the oars. They can't seem to get there, which feels like a lot of us these days, right? We're all straining at the oars, feeling like the waves are just too much for us to bear. And what's interesting about that text, and the scholars that we're using to guide us point this out, that in that text, at some point, the external storm moves inside of the disciples in the boat, and their hearts become heavy, become hardened. The language in the text is that the storm, the external storm that they're facing, becomes an internal storm. And their hearts are so hardened that, and it's the same language about hardening of heart that's used for like Herod or those who are going to ultimately take Jesus' life from him, right? Their hearts are hardened. They are frozen because they can't seem to move forward. And so internally they lock up. They don't know where to go. And if you remember the story, I think it's in chapter 6. I don't know. You can look in Mark's gospel. If you remember the story, Jesus, who's not in the boat on this lake crossing, starts walking to them on the water. And the words he uses to them is take heart. He uses the heart language, just like I was hinting at in the early of this conversation, right? Take heart. Start here. Take heart. And then he says, he uses the term all the way back from the creation narrative, I am, for I am. I might even go as far as to say, take heart, for it is, right? All of this is I am. It's a very Job-esque moment, right? Where Job's world completely falls apart. And at the end of Job, where he's lost everything, everything's in ashes, right? Just like we're experiencing. And God, in order to reveal God's self, shows Job the complexity of all that is. You live in the complexity of all that is. Begin to find your heart again in that complexity, in the great I am, in the great isness of being, Paul Tillich might say. Matthew Fox would say, find yourself again within the original blessing of creation itself through your heart. Let your heart beat there. I think that for religious people, this is where we need to spend some of our energy, right? Not trying to fix all the problems as if those solutions are going to solve this, but to get back to this place where our heart feels held within the gift of life in this powerful way that then begins to affect the challenges we face of rowing our way against all of the waves of a consumption obsession that we have, of this need to structure societies that are so dependent on resources that are troublesome. I mean, I could go on and on and on, right? These are the waves we face. We will not be able to navigate these waves without that heartbeat that is the heartbeat of the original blessing, until we in some ways wind our way a little bit closer to Eden itself, to the gift that we receive in the original blessing of the great creation. Whew. All right. Well, I would say that's what's going on for me, but I know that's going on for a lot of you as well. This idea that what's happening on the outside is hurting on the inside. This week I've been in a couple of calls, and in those phone calls with those conversations, I had one woman who was describing what was going on for her family up in the Napa region. And as she described their absolute loss of life and livelihood that was going on up there, you could just tell her heart was heavy, right? The weight of that experience of loss was settling into her own heart and soul. And to me, that's an indicator that that's then where we need to begin to long for a newfound sense of, well, how do we allow ourselves to approach this situation from the heart, from the center of who you are? The same was true. Another woman I talked to, she had been camping out in the wilderness just recently in some of her favorite sacred places in Mother Earth, only to find out, in this last week that those places have now burned to the ground. And just the disheartening of that news and that awareness, kind of made her freeze. She got stuck in it like we do. So I think we're all in that moment when just all the layers of what we're dealing with is weighing heavy on our hearts. So to re-find any kind of spiritual path from that place, it's good to go back to those origin stories and listen to the wisdom that we find there. Let me kind of close today by using the devotional that Julie, who is our current vice president of our congregation, shared at a council meeting. And it's a prayer that I think is a helpful one because it reminds you and me to reconnect our soul's path, our heart path, to the earth itself. And it seeks to build on this idea that our role as spiritual people is not to stand apart from the environment and the landscape of our world, but to be a part of the environment and the landscape of our world and the fabric of the human relationships as well, right? It's a drawing in a particular kind of way. And so I want to close with this poem and then get us all the way back, or this little prayer, and then get us all the way back to what I think is one of the first questions in the old Hebrew story of the garden that I want to ultimately leave us with today. Okay? So thanks for taking some time with me today. I too am trying to think this through or feel this through. Hopefully you're doing that as well. Let's let this prayer be a kind of a closing piece for us before we return from being so far east of Eden to the very essence of where it all begins for us existentially. All right? So a prayer. Earth, teach me stillness as the grasses are stilled with light. Earth, teach me suffering as old stones suffer with memory. Earth, teach me humility as blossoms are humble with beginning. Earth, teach me caring as the mother who secures her young. Earth, teach me courage like the tree that stands all alone. Earth, teach me my limitation as the ant which crawls upon the ground. Earth, teach me freedom as the eagle which soars in the sky. Teach me resignation as the leaves which die in the fall. Teach me regeneration as the seed rises in the spring. Teach me to forget myself sometimes as the snow melts and forgets its own life. Earth, teach me to remember kindness as dry fields weep with rain. Amen to that. That's a beautiful devotional prayer. I think it's a Native American prayer, so I'll see if I can't post that up for some of you to read later. And so let's just go back now to finish up here today by going all the way back to the garden. One of my favorite kind of moments in the garden. Adam and Adamah, Adam and Eve, the two manifestations of humanity are in the garden. They're in right relationship with all that is. But then they begin to distance themselves from that right relationship. They begin to already wander east of Eden in their own hearts. And as the story goes, it turns out that in the evening, in the great garden, God, the creator, life source, walks the garden as well. And on this evening, God can no longer find Adam and Adamah. And so he poses the question, hey, where are you? Where are you? Within the creation is the question that is posed. Where are you inside this great creation is the question that resonates in that story and in our time. And Adam and Eve, or Adam and Adamah, they recognize what's going on and they say, we're hiding. We're hiding. What does it mean to hide no more? To re-engage back into the original blessing where every heart of every plant and animal, soil, water, air, neighbor, all beats as one. My early steps towards healing we to feel my heartbeat in such a way as well. My prayer for you is you find that same rhythm in your own life. Amen. 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 Amen to that. All right. Let's see. Let me do a few announcements today. Hopefully, I know this seems like a confusing time, and maybe these talks are a little bit confusing, but if you pay attention long enough, there'll be a thread line of thoughtfulness that goes through it. And of course, as you think of stuff, make sure you post it so that I'm not the only one trying to come up with what would you call it, like rungs on the ladder to climb, or little tidbits of wisdom that can help guide your steps. Do that for each other, for crying out loud. So it's important. That's why we hang out on Facebook Live, so that you can contribute too. So make sure you spend some time, giving this some thought and posting up a little note for me to read and other people to read through the week. As you know, you're not alone on this call. When we are live, we have about 40 households watching. But by the time we get to the next one, over 200 households have come to this place and hung out with you and read some of your posts to help guide them through the journey. So we're delighted that you're here. And of course, it's important that everybody else who shows up through the week continues to feel connected to this journey that we share. And of course, my gratitude for all of your generous support as we, as a congregation, try to make our way through this. So a couple of announcements today. I just saw somebody say, thanks for community today. These are heavy days, especially stuck inside. Now I can't wait to return to nature. That's a metaphor I'm going to hang on to. So some great announcements. We're getting into the fall here, and I know it's a digital fall, so that's coming. But here's some of the highlights of what's coming up this week. Clearly watch for Martin's class, which will take place on Monday nights on the Enneagram. So if you're interested in that class, there's a Zoom link on the front page of our website. Pay attention to that. My Mark study continues on Wednesdays. You can also link to that. Send out an email with that link early on Wednesday mornings too, for you to catch up on that. Of course, listen to the music that Martin's provided for today. Morning has broken. I think that's what it is. Morning is broken. Just a reminder that maybe we can find our way into the inbreaking of a new day as a species. That would be a lovely hope to hang on to on a day like this. For our teenagers, if you've got teenagers, this is for teens and even early college students. We're having a meet and greet online this Wednesday at 7 p.m. with Cheryl, who will be guiding a new peer-to-peer ministry program. Very excited about the program. Cheryl's awesome. Want you all to say hi to her and welcome her to our community. She'll be with us the whole academic year. She's a PhD, almost graduate from the Graduate Theological Union, brings a wealth of experience to this journey of life we share. So let's make sure we put that on our calendars and show up on Wednesday night at 7 o'clock for that Zoom meet and greet. Also this week, we'll mail out to households for kids, our next September Holy Ground Home Project kit. And the first thing that's coming, this might be backwards for you, is a book to each household with a little book guide for parents to work through. It Takes a Village, written by Hillary Clinton, that will lead us into a conversation and a craft around why does community matter? Why does community matter so much? And that packet will be coming to kids in the next 2 weeks, but this book will be going out in the mail to households with kids starting this week. So watch for that. It's a whopper, so I got to figure out how to mail it to you. And then finally, in the future, we're working really hard this week on launching our podcast series. I tell you, it's been a lot of work, but I'm very excited about that. That's just around the corner. That should be coming up the week of the 20th. And then I'm very happy to announce that by this evening, I hope, we will have, and I will send out a link on the Facebook page, but also we'll make sure it gets in this week as well, a link to our home communion service. So we had some volunteers come together to film that, and it just got edited and produced by April. And so we'll have that on our YouTube channel under one of the, I can't remember, it's under one of the playlists. And you can then sit down as a household and turn your own kitchen table into sacred table and share communion with all of us. So watch for that. We're very excited that we finally got that together as well. And I think that's it. The last thing I would say is there is coming out a digital sheet that connects you to all the digital resources that we're going to use this fall to get going. And after we're done here, we're meeting in the lower parking lot to see if we can explore a hybrid model of doing on-site worship as a prototype for slowly coming back together, which will include the ability to stay in your car and worship, or to be physically distanced and worshiped, or then to be satellite via digital feed to YouTube or Facebook Live. So we're trying to explore that option too, coming up in the next couple of weeks. All right, a lot going on. All right, everybody. If you feel like you're kind of stuck in an elevator and getting a little anxious, just listen to your heartbeat and then let it find its way back in communion where it belongs, in that great gift of Eden that is intended for all of life to find their way, right? Okay. Be well.